Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Nora, part of the program team at the Princeton Public Library. We're very excited to be here together to discuss the new edition of Richard Stillwell's The Chapel of Princeton University with Reverend Allison Boden and Noel Valero. This program is presented in partnership with the library and Princeton University Press and is presented with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. We would also like to thank Labyrinth Books, who are offering a 10% discount on Stillwell's book to attendees of tonight's presentation. I've added the details to the chat, and we'll add them again at the end of the program. If you'd like to purchase the book, you can hit the green button below me at the bottom of the screen. A few logistics. During the most of the presentation, we will be turning the chat feature off, but I do encourage you to submit questions for our presenters using the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If someone else asks a question that you would also like to see answered, you can upvote it to give it a better chance of being answered on screen. We'll turn the chat back on toward the end of the presentation for closing thoughts. Richard Stillwell was the Howard Crosby Butler Professor Emeritus of the History of Architecture at Princeton University, Director of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, and Editor-in-Chief of the American Journal of Archaeology. The Chapel of Princeton University is the essential illustrated guide to this magnificent architectural and cultural landmark. This new edition, now with new color photos throughout from photographer Noel Valero and with an introduction by Allison Boden, the Chapel of Princeton University traces the history of the chapel and describes its architecture, sculpture, woodwork, and furnishings. Our presenters tonight are both really involved in this project. Reverend Allison Boden is the Dean of Religious Life and of the Chapel at Princeton and is a minister in the United Church of Christ. Allison has been a university chaplain at Princeton since 2007 and previously served at the University of Chicago, Bucknell University, and Union College. As an educator, her courses have covered topics such as religion and human rights, the rights of women, and religion and violence. She's the author of Women's Rights and Religious Practice. Noel Valero, the photographer for the Chapel of Princeton University, is a Princeton graduate and an instructor at Princeton University's School of Engineering. Before becoming a professional photographer, Noel was an IT consultant and a mechanical and aerospace engineer. As an educator, his courses have covered topics such as mechanical design, engineering projects in community service, and motorcycle restoration. While this session highlights his architectural photography, Noel specializes in sports and dance performance photography. So first, I'm going to bring up Dean Bowden to discuss a little bit about this project. Hello, Allison.
Nora, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone who is tuning in this evening. The occasion for the republishing of this book is the fact that this is the 50th anniversary of its original publication, and I'm so grateful to the Princeton University Press for their willingness to work with us to bring out this, as Nora put it, essential text about the architecture, the fabric of this magnificent building. As you may know, it was begun in 1925. Construction was begun in 25. Construction was completed in 1928, and the building was officially dedicated on May the 31st of 1928. And that, as you'll notice, is 1 year before the Great Crash. And I often just give thanks for the turn of events that made it possible for this magnificent building to have been completed before 1929, because if that had been different, we would have a very different chapel at Princeton University. It was really the roaring 20s that made it possible, and in particular, President Hibben, who made it possible. And as you may know, the great nave in that building is dedicated to him. He was a master at helping to convince Princetonians, past and present, that their gift to Princetonians of the present and future should be a magnificent structure built right where it is now. In 1920, the previous chapel had burned to the ground, the Marquand Chapel. There had been a lightning strike on Dickinson Hall, and the flames jumped from roof to roof. It was a long, slow burn that took down the Marquand Chapel. And in the midst of that burn, current students ran into that building and rescued things like all of the communion silverware and other appointments that they could carry out I think the environmental health and safety people at Princeton University, if they were to hear the story right now, would have kittens. We don't appreciate people running into burning buildings, but those of us who are fans of the chapel today are grateful for the demonstration of faith through which many of the beautiful appointments of the building were actually carried out. Hibben had to work hard to convince some people that giving money, $2.5 million total, to build this chapel was the right thing to do, even though the economy was booming for many, but not all people at that point. It was not what everybody actually had in mind in terms of largesse. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. The building is meant, as it were, to be read like a book. And so in English, we read from left to right. So when we walk in those magisterial front doors, if we turn to the left and just up some stairs there is a stained glass window that depicts the first portions of the biblical book of Job. And in those chapters, Job goes from being a man who has all good things people want for themselves, to being a man who is just devastated at the loss of his children, his property, his holdings, every last thing. And he is depicted there at his lowest. He is sitting on a dung heap and scraping his boils with a potsherd. As you enter the chapel, if you would turn to the right and go up those stairs to the balcony, that stained glass window contains a depiction of the latter half of the book of Job. It is Job at his restoration. And these depictions are very intentional. In the 1920s, there were so many Princetonians who had been devastated by the First World War, the Great War. They lost friends, sons, brothers, roommates, many of the stars affixed to the windows of dormitory rooms at Princeton. Those depict the war dead of Princeton University, and many of them are for World War I. And if you've gone into the great atrium of Nassau Hall, you've seen so many names from that war in particular. Many brothers who went to Princeton, all lost together. And so many in the public were not that excited in the 1920s to be giving their money to build a building that was to be a testament to the goodness of God. There was a lot of spiritual pain at that time. And Hibben did a masterful job, not just of raising money, but I think he did a pastoral job of trying to build a building that would be both monumental, but that would also speak to the particular spiritual place that people were in at that time. Those are acknowledged in those two Job windows just as you enter. If you keep going into the building through the doors that admit you to the great nave, if you again read from left to right and you turn looking up to your left, the first window on that north wall closest to Firestone Library that you will see is a depiction of Adam, Eve, and the serpent in the Garden of Eden. So our origins start at the beginning. Adam and Eve are cast in the most kind of luminous pale blue shade. It's a very interesting choice. And the serpent is got his apple and is an interesting kind of anthropomorphized snake. That begins to the left. And then we read all the way down those long north windows. On the north windows are scenes from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. On the lower level, they are scenes of the stories we know from the Hebrew Bible, and above that is rows of prophets and central characters, all of which take us chronologically all the way down that wall in time, and that ends in the great north window, which is the martyrdom of Christ. Jesus is there on his cross, but not just him, Saint Sebastian, Joan of Arc, many other people are depicted in that window. And then if you were to enter the nave and look to your right, you would be looking at the windows facing into Makash Courtyard. And those are windows that depict on the lower level New Testament scenes. They are the pictures of parables. Think back to when the stained glass of cathedrals were meant to be ways of educating a non-literate public. When the great majority of the public could not read, it was the pictures of stained glass windows that were responsible for so much of biblical and other education. So the parables are shown going all the way down that sweeping south wall. They end with the culminating sort of parable teaching of Christ, which is his Sermon on the Mount. On the clear story level above that are depictions of sort of the 7 great disciplines of Christianity, or is it 6? The first is philosophy. The second is theology, and one of the figures depicted there is Princeton's own Jonathan Edwards. Then comes the window depicting chivalry. Then a window depicting poetry. Emily Dickinson and T.S. Eliot are included in that window. Then comes the window depicting the discipline of law. James Madison is included there. And then comes the window depicting science, and Princeton's own Joseph Henry is there. So sweeping all the way down that south window, it ends in the great south window of the Bremen transept, which is the teachings of Christ, or the wisdom of Christ. And many of the great teachers of Christianity are depicted there. And in the bottom right portion of that great panel is our own John Witherspoon. At the very end of the chapel, above the altar, is a window dedicated to the subject of the love of Christ. And you can see the Last Supper captured right in the middle of that. That's up in the beautiful choir stalls, the chancel of the building. As you stand looking at that magnificent window, the builders of the chapel wanted to bring in literature, this being a university chapel. If you turn to your left, closer to Firestone Library, you'd see 2 massive panels showing 2 pre-Reformation texts. The first is Dante's Divine Comedy, and next to it, Mallory's Morte d'Arthur. Standing there, if you turn to your right, you would see Milton, Paradise Lost, and next to that, Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress, the post-Reformation texts. All throughout the building, there is nothing that is random. It is a building so filled with iconography of every kind, and every reference is absolutely meant to point to something that is very, very significant, that captures so much. In the choir stalls, there is some carved wooden figurines at the end of each of the choir's pews. One of them is one of the St. Gregory's, who was a master of choirs, and our current choir master, Penna Rose, will point to him right there in the choir stalls when our student singers are maybe not quite in tune, and try to summon up the threat and the fury of St. Gregory, who was known to issue grave threats to the choirs under his control. So just to leave you with the idea that all of that magnificent building is meant to inspire. It's meant to evoke a spiritual response in all of us. Like other great cathedrals, the ceilings are so high because they are indeed meant to draw our attention upward, heavenward, to those great vaults that are above. Why don't I hand things over to Noel right now, to Noel Valero, who is the photographer for this new version. The text, I should say, of this has been left exactly as Richard Stillwell printed it. What needed immediate updating, though, are all of those beautiful black and white photos from 1969 and 1970. And Noel has done an absolutely stunning job of creating images worthy of Mr. Stillwell's text. So, Noel.
Roughly about 2 years ago, when Allison asked me to undertake this project, my first reaction was, I'd love to do it because I was married in that chapel back in 1983. And in fact, if you see this book, this was a wedding present to us. And when Allison asked me, I said, I'd be more than happy to work on the upgrade, but my book is almost 50 years old. And it turns out that really was the latest edition. But now we have a nice full color version, thanks to a lot of effort by the people at Princeton University Press, and probably thousands and thousands of pictures that I took. Since the chapel's been kind of a dear place to me, I've always been there. I've always gone there to take pictures both inside and outside. But taking pictures of the chapel for the book and having to stay within Stillwell's text was a little bit different. When we came in and took pictures just about every place in the chapel, but a lot of the photos wouldn't make the book because they did not fit the text. Hoping that I'll be able to post, with Allison's help in the Office of Religious Life, we can set up a website that has photos of practically every window, so you guys can take a little tour. If most of you have seen the sidebar, I created a 3D virtual tour of the chapel. Everything there was taken from the chancel, and you can actually see a 360 by almost 360 degree view. Well, no, not 360. Well, close, of the chapel, and you can just kind of move around, and you can zoom in, and you can see a lot of detail on the architecture, wood carvings on the pews. But anyway, I'm going to bring up some of the photos that I took. You may not recognize them from the book because they have not been cropped or edited. Well, they've been edited, but they have not been cropped. So I'm going to show you the tour that I created of the chapel. So what you'll see is the entire chapel as take. Oh, sorry if I'm going to make you dizzy. Sorry, that's a little bit fast. But you can see the detail, level of detail. This took about 800 some odd photos stitched together in order to give you a look all the way around the chapel. And you can see the detail from the lectern. You can see the inscription on the walls. You can see the wood carvings. And what I was amazed at, even doing the same thing, is the detail I was able to get from the east window. And all the times I've been in the chapel, I didn't realize that I could read the text. And this little tour really showed a lot of the details I had missed in almost 42 years of being around the chapel. Anyway, that's a little view of the tour. And I'm going to try to bring you guys into some photographs of the chapel. This photo didn't make the this photo did not make the book, but we had all sorts of candidates for how to show the west facade of the chapel, and I thought this one with the sculpture might be a good candidate. But again, it didn't quite fit the text and didn't make the book. This also didn't make the book, when an alternate photo did. It was snowing. It snowed that day, and I wanted to get some photos of the chapel with the snow. And I didn't have a chance to put together my camera bag, so I just, believe it or not, I picked up a little point-and-shoot camera and managed to capture this photo. And the photo that appears in the chapel, taken on the same day, was also taken with a high-end point-and-shoot camera. Winter is probably the best time to photograph the exterior of the chapel because the trees have lost all their leaves, and you can see a lot more detail of the exterior. One of the things that I was asked to catch was some of the inscriptions in the chapel. This may be a little hard to read, but I had to change it to black and white later, but this is the prayer for Princeton. And here's the black and white version. It gives you a little more contrast. I think the prayer for Princeton, one of these images shows up in the book. The little inscription for the Marquand Chapel that Allison alluded to when it was destroyed by a fire, and this succeeded it. So this is the little inscription that's sitting in the chapel, in the transept. This inscription is for Frederick Fox. He was a major contributor to the book, to the first edition of the book, and compiling all of the donors and all of the details of the chapel. And he also happens to be, I believe, an honorary member of my class. So when I found this, I had to take a photo. I believe this photo, and slightly cropped, made the book. This is the north aisle. And this one is the Book of Job window. And taking photos of the windows was quite an adventure. In fact, in order to get pictures of all the windows, Dean Bowden closed down the chapel for one day, and we brought in a 30-foot lift in order to get me up to the right height to take some pictures of the windows. It wasn't quite what we needed. We needed more like 45 feet because those windows are massive, but we have to make do with what we have, and 30 feet was a lot better than shooting it from the ground. Another issue with the window is not this particular window. This window is one of the smaller ones, so I was able to just shoot it pretty close with a reasonable sized lens. But I'll show you some of the pictures of the window. This again is the northwest facade in the winter. You can see, well, close to late fall, because some of the trees still have their leaves, but a lot of the leaves around the chapel have already disappeared. I love this photo of the triforium. Again, this didn't make the book, but it was quite an achievement in a single photo to get 6 stained glass windows and the entire triforium all in one shot. That is the south triforium. And here's a photo of the chapel, of the nave, of the vaulting. For this particular photo, in order to get that starburst effect, I used a very small aperture so I can get the starburst. And I shot it at the time when the sun was going through the opposite windows, which was creating the prism effect. And the colors on the walls were just amazing that day. Part of this photo, I believe, made the cover. Again, this is just the west facade, taken on a clear blue sky. And I think this might be the same triforium. I took different photos of the portal, trying to figure out what would work best for the book. Some of it we framed it. We framed it with the daylilies blooming in front of the chapel, and some of the trees just coming to life in the spring, so that it gave kind of a message of rebirth for the chapel, for the rebirth for the year. This photo also, I believe, made the book. Always a discussion about whether or not we want to take photographs of the chapel with the doors open and the doors closed. But I think having the doors open conveys a different feel and different vibe to it. Again, the book called out for close-ups of specific windows. This is the one of St. John. It was taking photos of stained glass. If you guys try to do it, you have to take it at a time when there's not a whole lot of harsh light hitting the window, so that you don't get a sharp image. You don't get sharp lighting and contrast in it. Again, the Mallory window. I have photos of the entire window, and what you'll notice in this one, some of the lights in the chapel are visible from the top part of the image. Taking photos of large windows in the chapel is very difficult because there are a lot of lights hanging. The chains get in your way, and if you look in the middle of this image, see if I can point to it with a mouse. Right here, you'll see the chain for some of the other lights. So I had to be careful to kind of position the camera, get a good shot, and not have this chain going right through the photo. Okay. And another shot of the Bunyan window. Let's see, I believe this is the west window. This was taken from 30 feet up in the air, which is quite unnerving at times, but you can see a nice head-on shot of the window is the product. And here's some detail of the east window. Close-up of the Dante window. I'm sorry, I'm just going to go through these real fast. The entire west window. Again, this is from 30 feet up, and you can see if you look at the top of the image, it's sort of still at an angle, so that it's not a perfect shot of the entire window, because I need it to be another 15 feet up in order to do it justice. Yet another close-up of the St. John window. This is a shot of the north triforium. If you can see the unevenness of the light that was hitting the windows, you'll see the variation in lighting that I'm getting through the windows but the interior is lit almost evenly. And here's another example. I think part of this photo was cropped and ended up making the book, but you can see the effect of the lights coming through the left side of the photo that is just creating all sorts of refractions in on the chapel walls. This is a photo of the Millbank Choir. Again, this is from 30 feet up, so you're looking down to get a nice view of it. A little unnerving to take the photo, but I think the results kind of speak for themselves. The Dante window, again, the arrow position. One of the things that we wanted to do, part of this also made the chapel. The chapel is a living, it's a living building, and it's best when there are people in it celebrating all sorts of things. And this, in this instance, it's one of the baccalaureates where the senior class attends are all in the chapel, and it is just a wonderful sight to be. I mean, I was at my baccalaureate way back in 1982, and then I was at my wife's baccalaureate back in 1985, and again at my grad school graduation baccalaureate in 1986. So I've been lucky enough to participate in 3 of these. I wasn't supposed to be at the graduate school one, but I managed to get in. Okay. If you have ever been to the chapel for Christmas Eve candlelight service, this didn't make the book, but this is just an amazing image. This entire photo It didn't make the book, but I love this image because it's entirely lit by candlelight. Every light in the chapel is turned off, and this is just, to me, it's such an inspiring image to capture. And this is the end of that service. Part of, again, this is a book that was prescribed to be taken because it was mentioned in the text. This is the hidden garden. This is the bright pulpit, which is on the south side of the chapel. And there's actually a door leading, there's a stairwell leading up to that door. And you can they can actually access it and address a crowd should one assemble. A lot of you know about the the story about the Yale Bulldog being on the chapel. It's not a story, it's true, it's real, and it's right there. Again, that was mentioned in the book, so we have it for you in color. Here's a photo of the northwest facade, and with the trees, you can see that the chapel is not as visible as it could be. But this was captured with a very wide angle lens. That's why I have a little bit of a distortion. This is a view of the chancel. And from a very kind of a distant view, the apse. And we're back. That is all I have for you. So I'll be happy to entertain any questions from anybody.
Thank you both. This has been really exciting so far. I don't see any questions at the moment. People, please do feel free to add those as we talk. But I have a couple of questions to get us started. Allison, you obviously spend tons of time in that chapel. Do you have favorite sections, and are you still discovering new details every time you go in there?
I do. I'm discovering new details all the time. Do I have a favorite section or place? There is something particularly just jewel box-like about the little apse in the Marquand Chapel. So this is the little chapel off to the side, closest to Firestone. And while the large nave is spectacular and it can seat, well, it's supposed to seat 1,300, we cram more than that in on some bigger occasions. The Marquand Chapel is really intimate, and just the detail of the apse there, of the stained glass in those windows, and just the smallness of it is very, very special to me. Also, we keep the main altar covered in the cloths that symbolize the liturgical seasons. So we're changing those constantly. It's really only from Maundy Thursday into the Easter Vigil that there is nothing on that central altar. And that's when you can see just the beauty of the carvings of the wooden altar that's underneath, that wooden table. Really just stunning.
Thank you. That's lovely. We have a couple of questions that the audience has asked us. This is for either of you. There's a little brassy sculpture in the chapel hanging on the wall. It's a man with his arms outreached, but it cuts off at the elbows. Do you know what it is?
That is a replica of a very significant statue that is at Coventry Cathedral in Britain, which, as you might remember, was bombed in the Second World War to smithereens. And I'm forgetting the name of the artist who did that. It's on the tip of my tongue. He's also got a sculpture that's right next to the Riverside Church in New York. So sorry about that. But that's a replica of something that's there. It was a gift from someone, and yes, it was mounted on the wall. That's the Bremen transept, and there are a couple of really interesting things in there also. There are two banners that are hanging there. One is the coat of arms, the crest really, for the University of Glasgow, and the other for the University of Edinburgh, because, and I don't remember which is which, President McCosh came from one and President Witherspoon came from another. So a nod to each of them. Also behind glass in a vitrine in the Bremen transept is the ragged remains of an American flag that flew over the USS Princeton, which was sunk by the Japanese near Guam towards the end of the Second World War, and came into the possession of an alumnus who really wanted that to be at Princeton and to be in the chapel. We're very glad to have it.
Wow.
Okay, I actually got a photo of that sculpture and the banner captured in my 3D tour, so I'm going to share it with you now so you can see what Allison was talking about, and Allison can probably address them. Bear with me. I'll try to put it back on, and obviously it's not the right one. I will find it. Oh, there it is. Sorry, my apologies. And there they are. It's one of the banners. You can't see the second banner because of the angle, but there's the sculpture in question. You can get a close-up of it. And the banner, which one is this, Allison?
I'm not sure. I've never known which was which. I love the thistle on it, though.
So anyway, I hope that helped answer the question.
Yeah, that was great to see it. Noel, we had a question. Over what period of time did you take all of these photos?
Well, but when I was officially taking the photos, it was basically from the spring equinox of 2019 to the spring equinox of 2020. I looked at the dates on my photos. They both say March 20. There's one set from March 20, 2018, and I think that's when we did the windows. And from the March 20, 2020 was when I took the photos that they needed for the book. They needed certain photos, certain angles, and that's when I grabbed the photos of the inscriptions. And I remember that day. I think you were recording a service, Allison. So, but that was official. Some of these photos go back to 2016 because every time I can get a chance to get in there, I'll take my camera and take some photos, just depending on what the light looks like outside. I'm not sharing any of these, but I have taken ballet photos in the aisle, and Allison knows about it.
I think it's really interesting that you were working with sort of prescribed pictures that had to fit some of the text. And you talked about having to bring in that crane to get to some of those upper ones. Were there any other kind of surprises from passages that they pulled out of the text where you were, that were like a challenge to capture on film? Other than, again, having to be 30 feet up on a crane?
Yeah, 30 feet up. It wasn't even a crane. We're talking, it's a bucket on a telescoping boom. So when I was trying to take the photos, it took everything I had to be able to be steady doing it. And it was an adventure because you can't really use a tripod when you're swaying back and forth about 2 feet. So not only I had to change my camera settings because it had to be fast enough to get rid of that movement, and I had to time my shutter so I wasn't swaying in the wrong direction.
You know, in the original book, so many of the images of those great stained glass windows, because at that time nobody did get up into a cherry picker, way up there to get those images. It turns out they're drawings in the first edition. I didn't realize that. They're really beautifully rendered, but when I was looking over the book a few years ago now with some of the editors at the press, they were saying, so this is a drawing. So that's just a testament to how well they were drawn. But that was, I think, the workaround then for not being able to get pictures that would really be accurate or that weren't from the floor and would have weird angled sort of foreshortened kinds of things. And some of the other pictures that were actually taken because they're of the lower windows, as I said in the beginning, were black and white, which doesn't do justice to them at all.
We have a couple of questions about sort of the chapel itself and its operation. First was a question of if there was a Sunday service and if anyone can go to it. And then we had a question about if you could speak to the change in the mission of the chapel over time.
Sure. When it is not a pandemic, we do have a Sunday service at 11 a.m. and all are welcome. It's an ecumenical Christian service. It's been going since the building was commissioned in 1928. Right now, those services are pre-recorded and they're online on the chapel website. They become available every Sunday at 8 a.m. and are archived there so that you can access them whenever you want. Actually, we have many, many different programs through the chapel, through the Office of Religious Life that are recorded now, but we'll be back together in person as soon as we can do that safely. Noel, you were talking about that bright pulpit, the outdoor pulpit that looks into the McCosh courtyard. One of the ideas I have is if we are allowed to do outdoor services for safety's sake. You know, I don't think this is exactly what the builders of the chapel had in mind in the mid-20s, but that outdoor pulpit could come in really handy. And people can sit in circles 6 feet apart from each other in the McCosh courtyard, and we could be together outdoors at least. And the mission of the chapel, I think the mission of the chapel has both stayed the same and has transformed as Princeton has transformed. The chapel remains the site of religious services from a variety of religious communities, most of them Christian. But one of the ways it's changed is that Diwali is now held in the chapel. That's the Hindu festival of lights. Our Muslim community has done many important rituals and sort of public programming in the chapel. We had the Karmapa, the third most important Lama in Tibetan Buddhism, give a teaching on Buddhism and the environment there in the chapel. So as Princeton has changed in terms of its religious composition, the chapel has, we've just strived to make that a house of prayer for all people. And if people who are not Christian are able to do their thing in the midst of a building with overwhelming Christian iconography, and that is a cruciform building, it is in the shape of a cross. Sometimes people look around and they say, where's the cross? And the answer is you're standing in it, right? But Princeton is a significantly different place, and the chapel tries to acknowledge that. One of the added pictures at the very beginning of the book, and one at the end, is of Diwali at the chapel, because I really thought that it captured just a very 2020, 2021, and moving onwards glimpse of who we are at Princeton now. And yet the mission is the same. The people who in the 1920s had so much heartache over loved ones who were lost. There have been different conflagrations since then. There's a pandemic going on now, and the chapel is meant to give comfort and succor and inspiration to people. The chapel has always been a place where the great issues of the time have been debated. My predecessors as deans welcomed Martin Luther King Jr. to that building twice, in 60 and 62. That was not always seen favorably by everybody at the university at the time. It was more than the right thing to do, of course, to invite that very important voice to the chapel. One of the added photos that we have in the book is of President Jimmy Carter speaking from the pulpit only a few years ago about an issue very dear to his heart, the rights of women within religious communities. So I think of the chapel as staying very true to its mission, but also adapting to who Princeton is now and what the great questions are of the world today.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I apologize. My light just went out, which is why I'm dark suddenly. We have another question as you're talking about kind of the expansion of the role of the chapel and its mission and reaching all of these new people. we had also a question sort of about just the physical size of the chapel. Someone wanted to know if it was the largest college chapel in the U.S. And then I guess as a tie-in question, we'll say, with its size, can you talk about sort of the process of finding all of those moments within such a large space to capture? And maybe Noel can handle that part and talk about how many images go into that virtual tour. So first, is it the largest college chapel?
It is not. I believe the largest college chapel in the United States right now is at Valparaiso University in Indiana. A much more modern structure. As you heard in the beginning, before I came to Princeton, I was the dean of the chapel at the University of Chicago. That was for 12 years. And interestingly, that chapel was built in the exact same period as our chapel at Princeton. Cornerstone, 1925, dedicated in 1928. It seats about 500 people more. It is wider and a little bit longer. Interestingly, during that 3-year period, 25 to 28, at the University of Chicago, a decision was made to really pare down not the size, but the iconography. And so the stained glass is geometric colored patterns, but no images at all. So I have to admit, when I came to Princeton in 2007 and just saw the richness of the images and the much bolder colors in Charles Connick's windows all around the chapel, I just thought it's just infinitely more moving, but also infinitely more beautiful. So to my knowledge, we are about the third largest chapel, but my knowledge may be off. Princeton has, since it completed its own chapel in 1928, gleefully compared itself to King's College in Cambridge, and saying that is only the largest, the larger university chapel anywhere in the world. But that's actually no longer true.
All right. Well, being the engineer that I am, I looked it up in the book, the old copy of the book. The extreme length of the chapel is 249 feet, and the extreme height is 74 feet. And that's where I was saying that I needed to be at about 45 feet to get to the center of the window. And another thing I wanted to point out, what Allison and I wanted is, this is a photo of the chapel in service back in the day. And now it's a very, very different, very diverse student body that we have. It's no longer all white male wearing suits.
That's the one original photo that we decided to leave in the book. So as you can see, it is black and white. It's taken from the entrance to the nave. It is an absolutely packed chapel of white young men in blazers. The haircuts suggest 1969, 1970 to me. That would have been right about the time this book went to press the first time. And I think they must be at some kind of academic convocation, because in the distance way up front, you can see two men who I think are dressed as marshals. So maybe opening exercises.
I like
We wanted that photo for contrast.
Yeah, I like that you have that ability to go back and be working from another text and another set of images that you could then bring into the future. Noel, for capturing, again, we'll say the third largest chapel, in a session, how much space were you covering when you were doing a lot of those individual photos for your 3D tour?
That 3D tour took up 882 photos on a full frame camera. At the time, it was one of my older Canons, so it was 22 megapixels, and I shot that at 50 millimeters. Actually, no, I shot that at maybe 85 millimeters. So each photo is really quite detailed. And then stitching them all together, I mean, 882 of them, it was gigabytes of photos by the time it got assembled, and I got into the software that created that whole 3D thing. One thing I wanted to show you also, remember I showed you the photo of the chapel during the winter in the snow? The black and white one, I hadn't realized that I went out and kind of replicated that photo unknowingly back in 2016. From just a different angle with snow again. It's just Luckily, that I managed to take the photo, and we can replace a snow photo with a color version of a snow photo. It's, again, not every photo I took was with the chapel book in mind. I took a lot of photos before Allison had asked me that ended up in the book.
Wonderful. I did just reopen the chat, and at the top of it, if anyone has not yet had a chance to check it out, we have the link to that full 360 view. So please feel free to use that at your leisure. I love that we have that so people even either now who are in Princeton but are not able to get out to the chapel, or are across the world can really get in there and see really all of that exciting detail. And I personally am a huge fan of stained glass windows, so I love seeing all of those tiny images you see like tucked into the corners of those pictures. So I like that you're able to really get in there.
I'm going to share one more image from that tour. When I said okay, I'm going to try to. Whoops, sorry. I'm going to make everybody dizzy by doing this. Remember when I said it was almost 360 degrees? That black dot represents where my tripod was sitting, and I could not shoot straight down. But if you see, even the detail on the floor, was captured by the camera.
Yeah, even the grains in the stone.
It was a lot of fun trying to get these images stitched together when the only clue I had was the grain of the stone.
But it's a wonderful project, and I'm so thrilled that you were both able to participate in it with Princeton University Press and bring it to life in a new way. Again, you had that book and you were able to bring it into our modern time and capture really, again, stunning images and make it again accessible to our modern day. So we're getting close to the end here, but I wanted to ask you both if you have any final thoughts, any other projects you'd like people to be aware of at the chapel or in your own work.
Oh, Allison, somebody asked about pictures that were not in the book. Someone's interested in the candlelight photo.
If you're, as you mentioned, Noel, we'd love to put as many photos as you'd like to give us on our website for the chapel. That would be great. Yeah. That one of the candlelight service is a particular favorite of mine, and it'd be great to include that. If you're willing to make it public in any different way, that's great. We'd love to do it through our website. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, if somebody wants prints of it, I don't know what we'll do. We'll talk about that offline. Meanwhile, whoever asked the question, I'm easily contacted. Contact Allison or me, and then we'll try to figure out how to get you a copy.
If I have a last thought to share, it is really just that the pandemic has meant that we've been out of the chapel. In early September, I got permission to go back in to pre-record Sunday services, but we're not there together. The community isn't there, and it's a beautiful space to be in, but at the risk of sounding like treacle, it's just not the same without the people. And I had no idea I would miss that so much. I just can't wait for the time when it's safe for all of us to be there, to hear music, to play music for one another, to just be in that beautiful, beautiful space that is so sustaining to so many different people. I met an alumnus some years ago now who told me about his father, who was a student at Princeton in the 1920s while that building was being constructed. And he would come on into that building under construction and lie down on a pew and look up while they were installing those stained glass windows. And as this alumnus said to me, he said, my dad's not exactly a very reflective guy. He sold like screws and nails all his life as his job, said this alumnus. So I really remember with so much feeling how much my father really took out of just lying there and looking up into the vastness of that space. Anyway, just the vastness of that space. I've been remembering what that gentleman was telling me and how much I miss it too. Yeah, but it's still there for us.
Yes, and hopefully we'll be able to get people in there with you again as soon as it's safe. This has been quite a time of separation, but thank you both for being here to join us in this way, and let some of our patrons and other followers get a glimpse of that space and kind of join in this way.
Okay. Well, if you'll indulge me, one last photo on my iPhone. Oh, gosh, I can't see it. Photo's not doing it justice. But anyway, if you could see it, that's actually my wedding photo, the entire wedding party in front of the chapel. Sorry you couldn't read. I'll try to figure out a way to put it on.
So revisiting this space was particularly meaningful after all of your baccalaureates and your wedding. So
Yeah, but don't tell anyone I sneaked in for the third baccalaureate.
Well, you've told all of our patrons, but they'll keep it quiet. It's fine.
Yeah.
I did get into the last 3 as a photographer, so I'm very happy about that. Thank you, Allison.
Yeah.
If you don't get a chance to see it, I mean, the pageantry is in the color is just amazing.
And again, a beautiful space to have it all in. And again, thank you both for sharing your work and your artistry with both the book and with us tonight. We encourage all of our patrons to, again, please take that 359 degree tour of the chapel, and please visit their website, visit Noel's website to learn more about that project and about Noel's other work. We hope that you will continue to join us at the library here on Crowdcast and our other platforms for our programs. We've really, really loved engaging with you in this way during this time, and we look forward to continuing to connect with you through our programs and as well as in person. So thank you all again so much for joining us, and again, Noel and Allison, thank you. And
thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.